Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our panel this morning on employment facilitation post-COVID for a better recovery. My name is Aparna Bharadwaj, and I will be your moderator for today. I am an MD and partner at Boston Consulting Group, Singapore. I have 18 years of experience across both industry and consulting, and I have been supporting various Singapore government models and bodies since 2009 on the topic of future skills, education, employment, and workforce analytics. The panel today will proceed for 45 minutes, including 15 minutes at the end for Q&A from the audience. I am honored today to work with an esteemed group of panelists who have deep experience thinking about employment facilitation from the perspective of the government, the industry, as well as supporting individuals. Let me start by introducing our panelists today. Our first panelist is Mr. Tan Choon Sian, who is the Chief Executive of Workforce Singapore, a stat board within Singapore's Ministry of Manpower, responsible to develop employability, inclusiveness, and competitiveness in the workforce. Mr. Tan brings over 20 years of experience in Singapore public sector. He currently leads WSG's support to employers as well as employees, including career services. Our second panelist here is Mr. Gilbert Tan. Mr. Tan is a Chief Executive Officer of E2I, which is an extensive network for Singapore workers and employers seeking employment solutions. Under Mr. Gilbert's leadership, E2I has pioneered partnerships between institutes of higher learning, trade associations, and chambers to bring career coaching, training advisory, and industry transformation to many more Singaporeans. Third, we have Mr. Sim Gim Guan, Executive Director of Singapore National Employers Federation, SNEF, an institution with a mission to advance tripartism and enhance labor market flexibility. Prior to his current role, Mr. Sim served for 23 years in Singapore Navy, retiring in 2006 as Chief of Staff of Singapore Armed Forces. Welcome. Next, we have Mr. Daniel Robinson, Program Director and Board Member of Maximus, a market-leading firm specializing in helping governments to provide and deliver policy-impacting programs and initiatives. Maximus is currently providing services, for example, to support mature PMETs in Singapore. Last but not the least, we have Mr. Francois Lancon, Region President, Asia Pacific and Middle East for Manpower Group, a world leader in innovative workforce solutions. Mr. Lancon has prior experience in the technology sector across Oracle, SAP, and Nortel. I would like to extend all our esteemed panelists a warm welcome, and I'm delighted to have this discussion with you all today. Welcome.
Thank you.
So let me jump right in to the panel discussion with a very quick preamble. Over the last 5 years or more, we have seen massive disruptions in the job market around the world, which are accelerating the demand versus supply mismatches in workforce skills. These disruptions have been brought on by a variety of factors, including globalization, digitization, and an ever-increasing higher bar for productivity. What COVID and the pandemic has done this year is simply accelerated this phenomena. For example, BCG research shows that digitization in Southeast Asia has accelerated by 5 years in 2020 alone. These disruptions, along with the recessionary expectations, have of course led to a wave of changes in the employment landscape. And therefore, I wouldn't be overstating when I say that employment facilitation is the single most important question of our times. I hope I have your attention now. So my first question to the panelists here is that you're all leading organizations that are at the very forefront of this push, coming at it from multiple aspects. What is one word that each of you would use to describe the most critical employment facilitation imperative ahead of us, and why would you use that word? If I may, Mr. Tan Choon Sian, if I may start with you, how would you respond to this?
My one word would be resilience, like a bamboo, tough, but bouncing back with the pressure, and then you need two bending in the new shapes. So that's what we have been doing the last few months.
I really love that. Resilience like a bamboo. It has a very excellent angle to it. Gilbert, if I may put you on the spot now.
The one word I would choose would be relevance. I think the world economy are facing multiple issues. COVID is very obviously with us, but however, the economy is facing issues. Trade is going to be having some issues. The way that people face employment, whether it's freelancers, self-employed versus employed, is also changing. The population is aging, so there are many factors that are coming into play and affecting the way traditionally we think of employment and employees and employers. So being relevant to the correct group of people is important. For the individuals, if their employment type is changing, if they are aging, then how can we make sure employment facilitation is relevant to them? For employers, they are trying to come out stronger from this crisis and being able to respond and transform quicker to the Industry 4.0 initiatives, then how do we be relevant to them in employment facilitation? Now, of course, nationally, how do support programs, support schemes, even laws be adjusted and be updated to meet these new trends and the new demands of the workforce and of the people. So being relevant is extremely important in today's context, and being relevant is actually more challenging because changes are coming faster and faster. So being relevant is all the more important. So that's one word I would choose.
I love the forward-looking aspect of the word that you chose. Well, Mr. Kim Guan, maybe if I could come to you next, how would you say the one word?
The one word I would choose is openness. I believe that we need openness on both the sides of the employers as well as employees. Job seekers may not have the necessary skills to meet the employer's skill demand, but employers can send the workers for training, such as through the PCP, to close the gap. Employers should instead look at other attributes of the job seekers, such as attitude and aptitude. Employees, on the other hand, need to be open to taking on new challenges, perhaps even moving into new industries and starting anew and rebuilding their career.
Excellent. So I'm putting Daniel Yu on the hotspot next.
I think it's a combination of some of the words that we've heard already, which are all excellent. Is fluidity. It's one thing that the last year and the current challenges have told us is the need to be able to be fluid. You know, rigidness and systems and processes create uniformity. They create safety and structure for when things are in a state of normal. However, as we face adversity and challenges, they need to be fluid, both from a human capital management point of view, as a job seeker, in terms of weighing up your options and how you approach the labour market, and as an employer, how you recruit, select, develop, and support people. And also as employment services, as we facilitate and support, there will be a lot of challenges for us to meet with our clients in order to be able to be fluid to their increasing and differing demands as things change.
Excellent. I love the different perspectives of industry and individuals coming through in your response. Last but not the least, Francois?
Thank you. So, you know, when you're last, you have to pick your word carefully because you don't know what the others are going to say, right? But what I like is upskilling. And the important part in upskilling is the word up, which is, if you think about it, we all have fitness. I'm not saying that because I have a bike on the wall, but we have like skills fitness. And upskilling is about lifting up your skills fitness. And if you look at what happened with COVID, we had before like, wins, sometimes strong wins around digital transformation, new skills. And what COVID has done is transform those strong winds into a hurricane. And this hurricane going towards new skills. And our duty as organization is fundamentally to upskill at speed and at scale. That's why upskilling is so important.
Absolutely. I think scale is important because the enablement extends into the entire workforce. So I like that word a lot. So that's quite interesting because I see that there's a very strong forward-looking aspect in how we are tackling these questions. Now, each of you are working from different angles, looking at the same central question. So I'm going to ask a different question this time to each of the panelists coming from your perspective. And this time, Francois, I'll put you first so that you're not always last. The Manpower Group has done a lot of research, understanding the future of work. So what are the 3 top future of work trends that you think have the deepest impact on employment facilitation going forward?
So what's interesting, if you look at the 3 trends, some are pretty obvious, like the first one I'm going to mention. Some are not so obvious. So the first one is, you would all expect it, it's a growing demand for specific skills, right? So going back to my point, we need to upskill, we need to create talent. So as an example, I was talking to FMCG company last week, and they need more cyber experts. But what's very interesting is you say, well, you know, getting cyber experts is very hard. But in fact, what they really needed is for people to configure the routers and switches. And this is skills which are relatively easy to train people on. So there's a lot of upskilling, a lot of specific skills, but they are not that hard to train people to, which is really the good news. We can do that at scale. So that's the first thing, growing demand for specific skills, but not that hard always to get. The second point is very interesting. We've interviewed 8,000 people. And out of that, 1,000 people in Singapore, and say, you know, what's important for you? And what's important for them is, of course, health, right? But the second part was, well, they don't want to go back to the old. They don't want to go back to, you know, the old way, going back on a 9 to 5 to the office. So the future of work, the trend is that the future of work is defined by workers. That's what we see happening. And they want one life, you know. So for example, we've introduced with some companies, work my way, you know, flexible hours. We're starting to talk to some manufacturing plants where people can pick their shift. And we're going to see more and more of that, which is quite interesting. So second one, future of work is now more and more defined by workers. The third one is going to be of interest of everybody in this audience. The role of the Chief Human Resource Officer is becoming very, very important. It's in the spotlight, it has value, it is recognized. Because if you're a CEO today, if you're a CIO, you need to become a Chief Learning Officer. And the person who is going to enable to do that is your HR leader. So the role of HR is becoming more and more important. The other piece in HR is what they will need to do is to bring different skills. And let me give you a very simple example. You know, it's always good to start with yourself. I was brought in Manpower Group. I didn't know anything about recruitment. But what Manpower Group wanted to do, they wanted to bring in somebody that knows something about IT, because they know the future, there's going to be a lot of IT skills. And for me, it was a great upskilling, a fantastic experience. But to close on my point is the role of the CHROs, which is a lot of the people in this audience, has suddenly become extremely important. So growing demand for specific skills, future of work defined by workers, and strategic role of CHROs.
Excellent. I like that there are qualitative and quantitative aspects to the future of work and the future that we're all getting into. So that's very interesting to hear, Francois. Moving on to Workforce Singapore and you know, reflecting a bit more, Mr. Chun Sian, on the work that WSG is doing, leading from the front. My question was, I'm aware that WSG has significantly stepped up coaching and support for Singaporean and local employees and workers to meet the demand from job seekers. So how has this been accomplished? How has the support been enhanced? And what are some areas where WSG and the Singapore government can actively support the industry and the HR leaders, many of whom are on this call today?
Thank you, Aparna, for that question. So WSG has been making long-term plans for how we can better support the Singaporean job seekers and also support the employers, because it has to make sense for the employers. Because of COVID and the changes it brought about, we have to accelerate some of the plans, and we have to deal with a lot of the short-term pressures. And I think for COVID, even the short-term could be quite long-term. That means at least for the next 1-2 years. So it is with this perspective that we put together our plans. We are not alone. We are part of the broader national effort under the banner of the National Jobs Council. And in fact, on this call, we have many partners. They know who they are. I'll let them talk about their role. So it's not just WSG alone. We are all supporting the National Jobs Council's work. The National Jobs Council has been formed because in Singapore, we recognize jobs is going to be the top priority for the next 1-2 years at least. Creating jobs, helping Singaporeans get into those jobs when necessary, upskilling, helping employers so that employers can keep jobs and create jobs, and meanwhile with an eye for the future so that we still continue our transformation journey for the economy. So that's the big picture. Specifically, under the National Jobs Council, we have initiatives, for example, bringing forward hiring plans by the public sector. We recognize that the private sector will have their set of challenges, definitely in certain industries. Even in the industry less affected by COVID, I can understand business uncertainty is high, and therefore hiring sentiment may not be that certain. So the public sector will be bringing forward hiring plans, both short-term hiring to deal with specific COVID needs, but also longer-term transformation needs. We will, I like Francois' point about upskilling and staying relevant. So we are also using this opportunity to help employers prepare for the future, accelerate their transformation plans. A lot of conversion programs, career conversion programs, skills programs type of employment to help people get into the growth sectors. The example that Francois mentioned, cybersecurity, whether it's very difficult, deep tech cybersecurity, or slightly more simpler setting of routers and all that, we have conversion programs to get young people, mid-careers into this program with the support of employers and also other partners in this industry, such as the associations like SNAF, training organizations, and outreach partners like E2I. We also recognize that it is, to be realistic, some companies will hold back creating jobs. However, we may be able to persuade them to offer attachment opportunities. It's not really a job per se, but it is a chance to work in a company, to learn about the company, build your resume, also for the company to test them out. In the case of Singapore, the government comes in with a significant financial subsidy so that the employer finds it more affordable to offer such attachment opportunities. And we started with these opportunities for the young because we recognize the fresh school leavers are the most challenged now because they have no work experience. And if we are not careful, we have one whole generation of young people. We do know that if affected, the impact of a poor start when they start their career can last for many years and decades. So we're trying to help the young people, but very quickly with the support employers, we have expanded the attachment opportunities to also mid-career. And in Singapore, this makes sense because our population is aging. In fact, many of our job seekers are in the mid-career, middle-age group. So we have expanded it. They are called the traineeship program for the fresh graduates, and they call the pathway program for the mid-career. So these are some of the new programs that are rolling out. 2 more points. We are rolling out accessibility to job seekers. Previously, we have 5 major centers, 3 from WSG, 2 from E2I. We have also partners like Maximus and Inges. So that's 7. But in the last few months, we have rolled out 24 satellite centers in all the major HDB towns. These are public housing towns in Singapore. They have all been open since August 24th, and we have about 100 ambassadors stationed across the 24 centers just to make our collective services of the National Jobs Council more accessible. These are called Singapore United Jobs and Skills Center. And the last part is about employers. All these programs can only work if the employers come on board. So we have industry teams working along industry verticals tied to the industry transformation plans, but down to the specific companies to help them come on board this program and hold them. So it's very busy work, like I say, like a bamboo. We haven't broken yet. We are bending. Some of us have been bent quite out of shape in the last few months because of the intense work, but we are bouncing back and we are getting even stronger because we are getting many partners together. Thank you.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you, Mr. Tan. I think that was a very comprehensive explanation for the audience of the various ways by which Workforce Singapore is supporting. I really like some of the points you made about the whole ecosystem needing to work together, as well as the point you made about attachment opportunities, because I think in the new normal, one has to think not just in terms of jobs, but in terms of a variety of attachment opportunities and learning opportunities, which is a far more fluid future than what we have been used to in the past. So I really like those two aspects highlighted in your response. Thank you for that. So speaking of ecosystems, if I could move to you, Mr. Gilbert, next. One of the things that is interesting about E2I is that you are at the center of that three-way tripartite partnership between employers, employees, and the government. And we talked also about how this is critical to the success of employment facilitation. So what are some of your experience-based thoughts on how different players in that ecosystem can better work with each other for mutual benefit to each other? And if there are some examples that you share with our audience, that would be great as well.
Thank you, Aparna, and my fellow panelists. Yes, tripartism, the ecosystem of Singapore and how it works. Well, tripartism is a romantic idea to many, and we have somehow brought it to a reality in Singapore. And mainly a partnership with the government, the workers' representatives, and in Singapore as the NTUC, and of course employer representative. Of course, SNAF is a very key partner of this tripartite effort. And how we work together as an ecosystem, as a platform that trust each other in our approach. And of course, in crisis times like this, trust is a very important element, that the employers and the workers know that we are caring for each other and that we want a win-win, and the government coming in to ensure that the various initiatives are well supported. So in this context, actually, E2I operates, the government sets up several of these organizations to advance tripartite efforts. So there is TADEM for dispute management, TAFEP for fair employment practices, and there's E2I that is set up by the NTUC to support career facilitation, training, jobs matching for as part of the tripartite initiative. With that in mind, actually there are several things that we set to do, and the NTUC has set up this group called the Job Security Council. And Job Security Council is an ecosystem of employers, trade union representatives, supported by many government schemes. And I think Chun Chie went through a whole long list of them to make sure that we are able to even out access as well as demand, so that overall the employment situation in Singapore is balanced out as much as we can. And the intention is really to preserve employment where possible. So with the Job Security Council, through the tripartite effort, we have worked very hard to try to match access workers to areas that need demand. So when the crisis first hit and the circuit breaker got in place, many of the hotel workers, for example, were left without enough work in the hotel. So we worked with the various unions as well as employers to figure out how do we take some of these workers and redeploy them to areas that were of high demand. For example, our supermarkets were huge demand because people were stocking up. So we helped to move some of the thing there. The healthcare industry needed some demand, so how do we move some of this effort there? And with doing that, we actually preserve employment, prevent retrenchments, prevent unemployment. We also, as part of the tripartite effort, work together to create employment, and sometimes that involves a bit of job redesign, a bit of working the ground to assure workers that even with job redesign, you still have your job, to assure employers that they will be able to come out stronger from this effort. So having that trusted ecosystem is useful to bring forward this approach. And with this, actually, we have done many sectors, from cleaning in the past to even today manufacturing, and creating some new jobs that are available. And of course, thirdly, it's figuring out how do we work together as a tripartite system to ensure that these government schemes, the employers, and mobilize to bring to every employer and to mobilize the workers to support this effort. And with this in mind, together as an effort, we bring everything together under the National Jobs Council. I think Chun Chien spoke about it. So NTUC is a very key participant in the National Jobs Council with our Job Security Council, making sure that together the workers win, the employers win, and the government has a more successful system to come out of the crisis stronger.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Gilbert. I think that's a great way of framing it. And if I build on what you said, it's creation, retention, and evolution of employment. And all of those in some ways, need to be supported by the ecosystem. I really like that take, and I will use that as a segue into my next question for Mr. Kim Guan, which is that, again, quoting from what I'm familiar, some of the BCG research in Industry 4.0 showed that 60% of the manpower needs for the future I 4.0 skills, for example, will have to come from within, because there simply aren't those skills outside to be able to hire from in adequate levels. So again, linking to retention as well as employment, if I could ask you, Kim Guam, how can HR leaders balance better between hiring from the outside versus retaining from within? And how do they strike the right balance between those two elements? And from SNEF's work, what have you seen sort of working well in that balance?
Thank you, Aparna. There are many reasons why companies will benefit from reskilling and upskilling their workforce rather than hiring from outside for new areas of need. So one good example would be the Singapore Armed Forces, where you had also mentioned I spent more than 20 years with the Republic of Singapore Navy. The SAF spends a significant amount of time and resources upskilling and reskilling its personnel, and is able to bring its people along even as it continually upgrades its capabilities and acquire new assets and remain a formidable force. Through this process, it is also able to build a strong leadership succession pipeline. And at the same time, as the people grow up together in the organization, there's a strong sense of camaraderie and esprit de corps. So for private sector companies, it will also make sense to look at developing the capability of their staff for the same reasons. However, there are also other forces at work here. Companies will need to respond quickly to seize opportunities, and especially when they are entering into a new area of business where the expertise is not available within the company will have to look for talents outside. There are also other scenarios where companies will look outside of the organization, such as hiring to meet seasonal demand or hiring on a contract basis when the expertise is needed only for a short period of time for a specific purpose and is not core. At the same time, there are also trends that we cannot ignore. Now, I was chatting with some of my classmates from my MBA class recently. And for my Japanese classmates, one has since retired, but all of them have remained with the same company since we graduated in 1998. However, this is not necessarily true with the younger generation, even in Japan. A large proportion of millennials do not see themselves remaining in just one company. Besides purpose, they are keen to learn new skills and apply them in different settings. Notwithstanding, I think companies will need to retain talents within the organization and build core capabilities that support their business needs. They need to look at how they can keep their people engaged and help them grow within the organization by developing their skills and careers. We have heard earlier from our keynote speakers how COVID-19 have impacted the labor market in the Asia Pacific region and Singapore's response. And as Chun Sian had mentioned, the National Jobs Council, or NJC, is playing an important role at this time. The NJC will enable the effective implementation of job creation and matching, attachment and training for reskilling, as well as job redesign in support of enterprise transformation. Employers and employees alike should leverage on the SG United Jobs and Skills initiative to address key mismatch that exists in the labor market today, the timing mismatch, as well as the skills mismatch. While employers are cautious about hiring and perhaps even considering retrenchments, the support provided by the government, including the job support scheme, will help companies retain their staff. Retaining human capital is a key to better recovery. I hope too that companies had also used the last few months when demand was significantly lower to send their workers for attachments and training for reskilling. The reality, however, is that some companies have had to retrench workers to remain sustainable. For companies that are not in such dire straits, it may be useful to start thinking about positioning itself for the eventual recovery. Effective 1st September, with the introduction of the Jobs Growth Incentive, as well as changes to the professional conversion program for the place and train component, I would like to encourage employers and workers alike to explore opportunities provided by the PCP to acquire new capabilities and skills. You have heard from Chun Sian and Gilbert earlier. Indeed, I believe that it is by working together that we will be able to get through this difficult time and emerge stronger. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim Guan. I think that's a great sort of motto or theme to live by in these tough times. So far we have talked about the ecosystem. We've talked about the tripartite partnership. We have also discussed in great detail the industry and the employer nexus and the employee nexus. I wanted to talk about the individual with my last question, Daniel, before we open up to the audience. You've worked with a lot of individuals at different times of their learner's journey or their career journey. What are the moments at which the individuals are the most vulnerable? And how can, from your experience, how can we help them at those moments? Similarly, how can the individuals support themselves or find support at these moments? I'd love to hear the individual's perspective from you, Daniel.
Thank you, Aparna. And thank you to the other panelists. They've left me scarce feedings by which to add some value to this with the value of the comments that have already been made. I think looking at individuals and how they're impacted, one of the key approaches that we have at Maximus is really looking at those individuals and looking at their individual situations, their individual challenges, and the particular drivers that are impacting them on a very personal level. It's very easy to get sucked into the trends and looking at statistics, but behind all of those statistics is a personal journey. It's one person, it's a family, it's a community that is facing these challenges together. So there are particular vulnerabilities we found, and from working with every range of client over the course of my career, I think vulnerability comes at junctures where there is adversity, but particular groups and particular stages in a career can be sort of right at the beginning and then in that mid to late portion. So the groups of people that we talk about are graduates and your mature PMETs or your mid-career switchers. So interestingly enough, what a lot of people don't know is that actually these two groups of people, whilst they might on paper look like they're vastly apart, they actually face a lot of the same challenges or similar challenges. And I'll give you some examples of those. For example, as a graduate, you've just invested a lot of time, energy, money into gaining your qualification, and there could be a sense of frustration and desperation in terms of to now get a return for that investment, which can impact how people approach the labour market and not give them the clearest view. For someone as a mature PMET, as equally now has invested a lot of time and effort in skilling and upskilling and becoming, having a deep knowledge in a particular sector or a specialism. And again, that can charge their approach to either a switch or unemployment adversity with high level of frustration, high level of negative emotion around that. So equally, looking at how these two groups are viewed by the employment community, which impacts that. As a graduate, it's like, okay, cool, well, you're a graduate, but have you got the skill sets that we're looking for? Have you got some of those softer skill sets? As a mature PMET, it's like, okay, well, do you have the right skill sets? And how are you going to fit well within our organization? And, when you look at, how organizations typically approach jobs recruitment and how individuals typically approach job seeking, historically has been a bit of a mathematical risk management process. So as a HR manager looking to recruit, you're looking to manage the risk of that person being able to do the job effectively and manage the risk of them not staying long enough to add value to the organization. Similarly, from a job seeker perspective, you're looking at managing the risk of how long you're going to be unemployed for if you're indeed in that position, or managing the risk of this being the right cultural fit for you or the right organization. And what that does is that charges the decisions both on the employer side and on the job seeker side with the wrong approach for essentially making that decision, which is so key. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we're going to toss that in the trash can, not at all. That risk management process has got to be really, really key. But it's got to be charged with a little bit more. And we've heard from some of the other panelists around the evolutions that are taking place around this. It's got to be charged from an individual is getting back to what is going to drive my passion? Why am I working? And it's very easy. Everyone says, oh, I work for money. People don't just work for money. It is one of the byproducts of work and an essential byproduct of work. What keeps you really engaged in that role? What keeps you really engaged in that sector? It doesn't mean that your next job is going to absolutely tick all of those boxes. But what you can then use that to do is then create a longer term career strategy, whereby you have an idea of what your gold standard is and how you're going to work towards it. Essentially, similarly from an employer perspective, is, okay, so what are you looking for? What is your gold standard? You might not necessarily get that in the market at the moment because you've got to respond to what the market is supplying you. But what investments are you going to make in the development of those individuals, in the development of your HR strategy, your training and development strategy? So it's interesting that both groups of people, both the individuals and the organizations, have got a role to play individually and collaboratively in how they approach continuous learning, continuous upskilling. And as you look at PCP supporting that, you look at a jobs growth plan supporting that. Francois was talking about, you know, the upskilling and that continuous learner journey. And it's interestingly at the beginning, Aparna, where you said learners, and job seekers. And actually, we want to make those two groups of people become one. And knowing that a career is a continual learning cycle.
Yes.
But that's not just the responsibility of individuals. That also falls to the employers. And actually, this adversity that we've seen recently has accelerated responses to that on both sides of that fence. And I think it's good that that will continue. And how, you know, our investment into the people that we work with to support is helping them unlock that passion, that initial fuel in the engine. Why? What are my drivers? What excites me? Doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to get that immediately, but you can put that into a longer term plan. Employers, what are you looking for as a gold standard? Not just the immediate need you've got now. What are your needs for the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? What is your overarching plan? We've got to move away from it being very transactional, where it's, I need a job now, I'm going to pick something up. I need an employee now, I'm going to pick someone up.
Yes,
making
absolutely.
that a bit more strategic in the approach.
Absolutely. No, that's great, and I think it brings a strong personal aspect to this unique year that we are all going through together. Thank you for all the inputs. I'm now going to open up. I'm sure our audience are eager to ask questions, so I'm now going to open up the panel for questions from the audience. Let me paraphrase 2 questions that I saw across different members in the chat group. So the first question is that advanced technologies are coming in a big way and very, very rapidly. And there's a need to upskill in order to meet the requirements of those advanced technologies. So what are the new skills that are needed in this tech heavy future? And can job redesign help? So that's the first question. If I may direct this question to Chun Xian to start with, and then of course, all panelists are free to chime in.
Thank you, Aparna. And I believe those questions came from various audience, including Mr. Richard Tan, leader of the Electronics Union in Singapore, a good friend of ours and a good partner. We talked about Industry 4.0 briefly in this session. That is one example of a future skill. What the broader level, the new skill sets will be digital in nature. Digital, as we can tell from COVID, has changed our lives. But it is not necessarily very deep digital skills. It's even just adapting to use very user-friendly digital skills. And I think a lot of the training will go in that direction. And in fact, a lot of the training itself will be digital. Thank you.
Can I just add, obviously the digital skill is important, but I think we should not be just focusing on developing digital skills. Some of the other employability skills continue to be important, such as analytical, conceptual, and evaluative skills. Interpersonal skills, I think was mentioned earlier by Daniel. I think we should ensure that the development is a bit more holistic so that individuals will thrive within the work environment. Thank you.
Thank you for that. The activity on the chat is constantly increasing, which is great to see. I have another excellent question on the SME sector. So the question is that SMEs understandably have an important mandate to upskill and reskill during these times. And of course, there's a lot of government support provided to them through grants and schemes, etc. How to ensure that SMEs continue that effort and continue that upskilling, reskilling imperative beyond the period of the support? So I will direct this question to, actually there are several of our panelists working with the SME sector, but either Gilbert, Francois, Daniel, any of you can start first.
Maybe let me begin this topic. Well, I think training and upskilling has always been supported in Singapore. In fact, we are one of the countries with the most support. And I don't think, well, in crisis, of course, there's deeper support, but the support is unlikely to completely tail down to zero. But however, what's more important is that as an SME, it's important to see that my investment reaps returns. So picking the correct training program, picking the correct skills framework to train my employees in is important so that I can reap the benefits and start with small bites, get the returns in small bites, and then you can go for deeper investments into different skill sets, deeper skill sets. I think that would be a good way to go, step by step. And of course, there are also various platforms that training can be delivered in a mass way, in a cheaper way. For example, learning platforms that are highly available today. NTUC have our own ULEAP platform. And these platforms bring forward training in a low-cost, bite-sized way that does not interfere with my workplace, because SMEs may be concerned that if I send workers for training, my workplaces are vacant. So these training in online learning platforms could come in bite sizes, in small little packages that are easier to digest and yet does not affect operations. So one, I think it's figuring out how to choose the correct course. Two, see the outcomes and benefits and grow from there. And three, tap on new technological ways to learn that will actually bring it easier and easier to absorb and easier to digest. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilbert. Francois, I see you're unmuting yourself. Go ahead.
Yeah, so if you're an SME, things are going to be complicated, right? You have to manage your cash, you have to manage your rebound for the business, and then you're told, oh, you get to train in addition. So my advice, if you're an SME, is seek help, right? And when I say seek help, is one of the parts. You're going to pick a few people in your company you can train. You can leverage other companies to bring you people that are already trained, or kind of borrow, what I call the borrow model, and then use the borrow model to share resources. And part of it is also leverage, because Singapore government, as Gilbert said, has fantastic resources, right? Leverage what they do. But it's going to be, we want to be realistic. SME owners, SME CEOs are busy. Hopefully they're great CHROs, but they need to get outside help. Otherwise, the worry, you're going to get so busy, you're not going to do it. So that's my only advice, seek help.
Yes, Daniel, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And just leveraging off of both what Kim Guan and Francois have said is around for the SMEs. I've been lucky enough to do some work recently with Enterprise Singapore and ACE, specifically in this arena. When there's a new company being set up or an SME receiving support, it tends to focus generally on brand, marketing, financials, and less emphasis is placed upon developing a strategy for human capital. And I'll just crown it off by saying, the dollar of development. They talk about, well, what if we train people and they leave? That's my investment gone down the drain. And but the bigger question is, well, what if you don't train them and they stay? And what does that do to your business? So it's a bit more about investing in educating our SMEs and for SME owners to look at that strategy around human capital is really key. I mean, you look at Singapore, the frameworks are there for upskilling. I've worked in 5 or 6 different countries globally, and Singapore takes a very genuine approach to frameworks for upskilling and making that accessible. And I think it's about now educating us as business owners and as SMEs in order to execute on that.
Absolutely. So I'm hearing a few themes coming in. But one is continue to ask for help. Second, build lasting skills. So don't just build for now, build for what's going to help SMEs become more and more independent over time. And don't forget the human aspect. I like all three of those comments. Great. So there's an interesting and very nuanced comment coming from an audience member, which is that, the impact of COVID, one of the impact that many people don't realize immediately is that performance evaluation becomes more challenging. And obviously in these uncertain times, with everyone's job description being very fluid, there is a need to do better performance evaluation, which can then help with the upskilling and reskilling mandate that many of the HR leaders are driving. So, one, do you agree with that? That their performance evaluation is a lot more complex in COVID times than it was before? And second, how can HR leaders help? And how could we support? Yes, Francois, I see you're unmuting. Go ahead.
So let me be a little bit controversial here, just for the sake of it, right? I think the good old performance evaluation, go every year, meet your boss, tell them, you have good you've been, this is gone. This is something of the past. And my advice to any HR leader in this call is you probably should be stopping doing it. What has happened with COVID, it has just accelerated something, which is we're now into monthly, quarterly evaluations, right? Nearly into daily evaluations. And part of our job as leaders, part of the HR leaders and part of the managers is to basically have this weekly, monthly conversation with our employees and say, well, now it's time to upskill. Now it's time to get some training. I mean, we're going to become more digital, take some digital training. But that's kind of becomes, it's not the old, okay, this year you've not done well, go to school next year, we'll talk about it. This is weekly, monthly, and it's not that it is a complete change, but it is, the process has to be rethought completely. That's my advice to all the HR leaders on the call, if they have not already done so, and I know many have done it.
Can I just add a comment? Yeah, I thought that quite often the way we have been previously doing performance evaluation perhaps may not actually be the best way of doing things. Quite often we look at performance from the perspective of what are you, the face time. That is, are you in the office? We really need to shift towards performance by outcome. And so this perhaps provide us with an opportunity to relook at how we do performance evaluation, more outcome-based rather than just expecting the staff to be in the office.
I love that comment. Actually, I'm hearing two things from both of you. One is the frequency of evaluation and the dynamism of it has to step up. So every 6 months, my boss tells me whether I'm thumbs up or thumbs down. That's a dated way of working. It needs to be constant dynamic evaluation. And again, it's based on outcomes and therefore less of whether you are in office and how many hours you are in office, especially with the work from home model becoming a norm, at least for the foreseeable short term. This is an important nuance to keep in mind. Now, we are running towards the end of the time allocated to the panel, but I have time for inserting just one quick question. So if I could request the panelists to give very quick reactions to that one. So the question is that how can HR leaders ensure that they are inclusive in their recruiting and their retention strategies? Inclusiveness both from a perspective of seniority, for the older workforce, and inclusiveness also from the perspective of diversity, especially to the point on technology earlier. Some of the older PMETs might have challenges in terms of adapting to technology. So how can HR leaders help be more inclusive? And I know that WSG as well as E2I and SNEF are all working in this space. So I'd love to hear some comments on this.
I'll give a shot to this answer. In our work, we met many CEOs and HR leaders who are in fact very focused on inclusivity. The challenges we hear from these HR leaders is that sometimes the hiring manager has certain preconceived notion of what kind of person they need to hire. Quite often they say, I need someone that is immediately able to do the job, plug and play, basically. So I think one big area, the HR manager with the support of the rest of the top team, is to persuade the hiring managers to be open to consider people in different manners, different types of employees. At least in the case of Singapore, if the skills is the gap is a skills or attachment, there is various support schemes we talk about. So my advice is for HR managers to find ways to persuade the hiring managers, and if you need help, for example, advice from associations, fellow practitioners, government, we'll be happy to step in. Thank you.
Thank you, Chun Sian. Any further comments on this? I think we have a minute.
A very quick comment from me.
Yeah.
Two quick comments. One is, and I think Chun Sian hit the nail on the head, is when HR managers or hiring managers are talking about finding the type of person. Now that in itself drives them down a stereotyping obsession, whether that's age or race or indeed skill set. Actually defining what you want the role to do, what are the deliverables and what are the skill sets needed, and then defining the mechanism by which you're going to measure that through the recruiting process. I think the second piece is around how do you be more inclusive and more diverse, is be deliberate. It's not enough just to be a good employer. You have to proactively be an inclusive employer, but you have to be very deliberate about it.
Maybe let me add on to Daniel's sharing. I think it's important that to note that actually traditional processes of hiring and recruitment do put a bit of disadvantage to a more mature worker. And so it's important to be a bit more revolutionary and different in the way you source for candidates, the way you interview, the way you bring someone through the whole recruitment process. And secondly, as a leader, it's important to lead with culture and values. And if you believe in it, like what Daniel said, be deliberate in your decision making, so that will actually inspire others to do the same.
Yes, indeed, the role for HR leaders is more important in this present time than ever before, and therefore stepping up and taking a proactive approach is highly recommended. Great, so we are on time. Thank you so much for the engaged discussion from the panelists and the frank sharing.